Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Steve Cannane. Coming up, sealing the deal. The Citizens' Assembly is gone. What else will Labor have to do for the Greens? Lord Stern's dire warning about what could happen if we don't put a price on carbon. And the US President turns the page on Iraq. But where will the story end? Our panel tonight, Annabel Crabb, Chief Political Writer for ABC Online, Tom Switzer, Research Associate at the US Studies Centre at the University of Sydney and a former Senior Liberal Advisor, and Damien Kingsbury from Deakin University School of International and Political Studies. First, the deal between Labor and the Greens. In exchange for the support of newly elected MP Adam Bandt, the Prime Minister has agreed to a range of demands, including parliamentary reform. Bob Brown says it's all about stability.
Our commitment is to, nevertheless, stable and open and good governance of this country. And we take that responsibility with a great deal of gratitude to the people of Australia for the hand they have dealt us.
The deal sees the Citizens' Assembly dumped, replaced by a climate change committee. Of course, Julia Gillard had a positive spin on that today.
In that multi-party forum, I will obviously be saying that we went to the last election recommending a Citizens' Assembly as a way to assist in building community consensus. I expect that the multi-party grouping will...
Tony Abbott has attacked the Greens for jumping straight into bed with Labor instead of at least going on a few first dates with his party.
Clearly, the Greens will be in the driver's seat of any renewed Gillard government. And what this means is that there will be a carbon tax, there will be a higher mining tax, there will be funding cuts for independent schools, and there will never be any offshore asylum seeker processing. What today's announcement means is that Australia now has two coalitions. There is the Liberal National Coalition that people are familiar with. There is now the Labor-Green Coalition. Only one of those coalitions will be good for regional Australia.
Annabel, why did Labor need to do a deal with the Greens given Adam Bandt had already said that he would support them in the House of Reps?
Well, I think it's just firming up a kind of an impression of progression towards minority government. I mean, I don't think anyone is particularly surprised that of the two potential minority government partners on offer, the Greens should select the Labor Party. I noticed that Tony Abbott there is talking about there now being two coalitions in this country. Now, that has a... pitching it that way, I think, has an innate advantage for Tony Abbott in that he is, I think, hoping to spook the other the other independents into not siding with Labor on the basis that all of a sudden it's this behemoth that's a kind of a Labor-Greens coalition. But it kind of also begs the question, if it is a coalition, then how does that affect the 2PP vote situation across the country?
That's a very good point, Annabel.
I mean, you know, look, this whole situation is so bonkers now that, you know, every comment and every construction of the situation has a different political advantage or disadvantage, and much as it may be to Julia Gillard's political advantage to give an impression of being a government in waiting that's sorting out its position and sorting out some stability with the Greens, I think there's every element of disadvantage to the Labor Party as well in this sort of perception of a direct coalition between the Greens and the Labor Party. I mean, this agreement in itself is not really a coalition agreement. In effect, all it really obliges the Labor Party to do is attend regular, really frighteningly regular meetings with Bob Brown and agree to consider a bunch of things that they were already considering.
Which is
anyway.
pretty funny considering the previous Labor Prime Minister wouldn't meet with Bob Brown.
Yeah.
Tom, I wanted to come to you on this and ask you, do you think that any deal between the Greens and Labor could be a disadvantage strategically when it comes to Labor negotiating with the independents?
I would have thought so, because if you look at a lot of the constituencies for these independents, they are broadly fairly conservative. If you look at the Senate vote at the election 2 weekends ago, all the opinion polling evidence from Galaxy and Newspoll, it's quite clear that a lot of the people who live in these seats of the 3 independents are Conservative, and I suspect a lot of them would be very reluctant to get in bed with the Greens. But I think what Gillard has done here is a massive backflip, and it's a betrayal of Australian democracy, because, Stephen, I can just imagine a lot of people are furious that they won't be able to have a citizens' assembly now.
I think there's a lot of people upset about that, Tom. Damien, I wanted to ask...
Not including Julia Gillard, I suspect.
Damien, I want to ask you about that issue that Tony Abbott was trying to sell today, that there's now a coalition between Greens and Labor. Would that be any different to any coalition that he may have with independents if he managed to get them on side?
Well, I think it's more of an alliance than a coalition, and alliance is a looser arrangement. If he got them on... I just can't see the Greens going across to the coalition. I mean, if you look at their support base, they're essentially disaffected inner-urban ex-Labor voters, and the fact that there is some sort of link now between the Greens and Labor is a fairly natural outcome. I think it's a return, in a sense, it's a return to the fold.
Well, the election costings were back on the agenda today too. The Prime Minister says she wants the Treasury's verdict on Labor and coalition policies released to the public. That is, if the independents agree.
We want to be transparent. We believe those costings should be released publicly, and we will seek the agreement of the independents to do that. I would call on Mr Abbott to do the same.
Tom, will Mr Abbott take up Julia Gillard's dare there?
I have no idea, and in many respects this debate that we've been having over the last few weeks, it's a very dizzying one, because we're going around in circles so many times. Treasury, to some extent, was compromised. I think when the leak went to Lenore Taylor of the Sydney Morning Herald about the coalition's costings, that was not a good look for the Treasury, but nevertheless I don't think it's a problem. If the coalition is going to release its policies to the independents, then it has an obligation to release it to the public. I think once it's there, it's there.
So that'll end up happening, Annabel, do you think?
Well, look, I think we've got away from the whole purpose of the Charter of Budget Honesty. I mean, honestly, the whole thing is just a ridiculous charade. I mean, and I think that if we're going to be kind of fair dinkum about using these extraordinary couple of weeks to negotiate a better way of doing things, and the government the coalition has already said that they're going to countenance a parliamentary budget office, and Julia Gillard, in her agreement with the Greens, says she's prepared to put together a parliamentary budget office, I think within the auspices of the Parliamentary Library. Well, maybe this is kind of what they should be applying their attentions to. I mean, I thought there was something a little bit, dare I say it, old paradigm about Julia Gillard's hauling out of the costings debate again today. She's trying to breathe some further life into that to make Tony Abbott look bad by comparison. And yeah, you know, Tony Abbott does look bad by comparison, and that is the way the Charter of Budget Honesty works. It gives an advantage to incumbents. They get Treasury to both draft and evaluate their policies, while the opposition have got to fling in what they've managed to cobble together without assistance, and then try not to look embarrassed when their errors in their workings are exposed. I mean,
Damien, how did you see this bringing up the old electioneering element of the costings again?
Oh, look, I think both sides are going to do whatever they can. Governments are obviously going to push the advantages they have in this regard, and oppositions are going to find the situation very awkward, and it's just part of the rough and tumble of the game. I think it's expected that they would go back to this, and it's part of the continuing post-election but continuing campaign.
Well, unlike Adam Bandt, the independents are taking their time deciding who they're going to support, and Andrew Wilkie has already rejected Labor's first offer, and the country independents are busy with their briefings. They met the Treasury Chief, Ken Henry, today. Rob Oakeshott and Tony Windsor also had a chat with climate change economists Lord Stern and Ross Garnaut. But that didn't interest Bob Katter.
I think their positions are fairly lightweight to those two people, and I most certainly respect my colleagues. They wanted to hear their viewpoint. I've heard their viewpoint on many a times, and I simply disagree with them dramatically. And just to indicate how stupid those people are, there is a very unassailable scientific case that there will be a problem arising in the oceans. Right? They don't mention that. They talk about global warming.
Don't worry, Bob, Lord Stern is worried about the oceans too, and not just the one that bumps into the coast of North Queensland. In an address to the Press Club today, the man who wrote the influential Stern review on the economics of climate change for the British government said unless the major economies put a price on carbon, the world will be facing great peril.
Risks are immense by anybody's standards. If we run as something like business as usual for a century or so, the greenhouse gases will build up from the 435 parts per million of CO2 equivalent we see now to something around 750 or above, and that would give us a high probability, perhaps 30, 40 or 50%, of seeing temperatures increasing more than 5 degrees centigrade relative to, say, the middle of the 19th century. We've not seen that as a planet for 30 million years.
Lord Stern went on to say that under that scenario, hundreds of millions of people, if not billions, could be displaced from their homes, leading to global conflict on an unimaginable scale. Tom, given that Conservatives are not inclined to risk-taking when it comes to public policy, why have they not embraced what Lord Stern is saying here, a carbon tax, to minimise the risk of this kind of global conflict and global insecurity the way he sees it?
I think one of the reasons why a lot of people around the world, not just Conservatives in Australia, are very reluctant to decarbonise the economy is the costs involved. I mean, one of the key issues in this debate, it's not so much the science, it's really the policy response, and particularly a global response. Now, last December in Copenhagen, it was a fiasco. You had many countries not coming on board to sign a legally binding global agreement to reduce emissions. If you look at the United States, they've had huge supermajorities of Democrats in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and of course in the White House, and they still couldn't even get a climate bill that wanted to cut carbon emissions by 4% of 1990 levels with loads of compensation to industry. They couldn't even get that on the Senate floor. So with Republicans making gains in the House and the Senate, the chances of any comprehensive kind of climate law in America are very limited. You look at China and India, they talk the talk, but one of the reasons why China did not want to sign up to a legally binding agreement last year is that they don't want to be bound by these targets. They want to grow their economies, and the cheapest way of growing their economies is on the back of cheap energy, which happens to be carbon. Look at the European Union. I mean, Nicola Stern can talk all he likes about the European Union, but the fact of the matter is that carbon emissions actually went up during the first 3 years of an ETS.
But another way that China is currently growing its economy and is planning to grow its economy over the next 10, 20 years is through low-carbon innovation as well.
And that's what Lord Stern talked about today at the Press Club too. He said Australia had real opportunities here with a low-carbon economy. This
is one of the ways that this debate is gradually changing around at the moment too. And you've got this prospect now of this idea that there's a global green race for low-carbon innovation, and the idea is that China, Japan, South Korea are really putting a lot of resources into that.